you again. And I thought it would be cool if we started with you telling us who you are.
Sure. My name is Cecil Castellucci. I'm the current writer of BATGIRL. I've also just had a book come out called The Plain Janes with Jim Rugg. I should mention that BATGIRL is currently drawn by Carmine DiGiomenico, and BATGIRL and Plain Janes with Jim Rugg. And then I also recently did, I don't know if you have that, Girl on Film, which is, yeah, it's a memoir, graphic novel memoir about trying to become an artist, and it's it came out on Boom in December, and it's with the artists Vicky Lita, Melissa Duffy, V. Gagnon, and John Berg, and it's about growing up in New York City and wanting to be the world's greatest filmmaker and completely failing, and the nature of memory.
Oh, hey, that's cool. I think we do have it downstairs. I don't have it here.
Cool. That's okay. And then also Shade, the Changing Girl. Yeah. And Female Furies. I forgot about that one.
I got you.
Oh, yeah. I was like, I don't know where they are. Anyway, I write the comics is what I'm trying to say.
I do the things with the words.
Yes.
So I want to start off by saying thank you for helping us celebrate Free Comic Day.
Absolutely.
It was devastating when it dawned on me that we would miss Free Comic Day, because it is literally my favorite day of the year. I got in a little bit of trouble the year I got married because I did not change that stance. And so people were like, come on, Gavin. I was like, no, it's the best day. My husband understood it. And we actually waited until after we dropped comics and stuff to go on our honeymoon. We got married on a Sunday and we went on our honeymoon on a Thursday. So he knew what he was getting into when he married me. So we have a bunch of questions, and we also have questions from our customers.
Great.
So is there anything you want to talk about before we dive into the questions?
I mean, no, I mean, I hope that everybody is doing okay. And I know that this is like a really weird time. I find comfort in stories and art. I mean, in the Plain Janes, my whole life motto and Jane's motto is art saves. So I hope that all of you are enjoying art and making art and engaging with art of all types. And I like the fact that books and comics can expand the world beyond the walls that we're living in right now. So I hope you're having really good adventures. That's all I want to say.
We're doing a lot of delivery and a lot of shipping and a lot of like stories, and indie artists and things like that are posting stuff. So we're trying to keep our culture and our community going through all of this through our Facebook page. So hopefully we're doing okay. I'm very, very much looking forward to opening again because I miss all my people.
Yeah,
I'm a hugger, so this has been lots of no fun. So just going to start with some of the questions our customers have had. What was your first comic that you remember, and kind of talk about what it meant to you and why it was significant?
Sure. You know, there's kind of a 4 of them that were kind of the first. I was in love with Batman, the Adam West Batman TV show. I invited him to my 4th birthday party. And so before I even knew how to read, my mom and dad had bought me a Golden Age Batman and Superman omnibus. So I would just pour through those pages, just looking at them before I could read. And we're French, French Canadian. So bande dessinée comics have always been a part of my life. So Tintin, Asterix, Lucky Luke, the Smurfs, like Schtroumpfs. I can't remember when those weren't a part of my visual vocabulary. And then the Peanuts. The Peanuts were a really big thing for me and for everyone. And one thing that I remember was that I had some bed sheets that were, you know, Snoopy and Peanuts bed sheets, and they had like the characters on it with some word balloons. And I remember when I was in 1st grade, I realized one night when I was in bed that I knew how to read because suddenly my pillow made sense.
That's awesome.
So so those were kind of like the 4. Those were probably between ages 3 and, you know, 6 that were like sort of my intro. And then I had a younger brother, so he had a pull list, and so his comic box was my comic box.
Nice. Was there a point in all of this that you were like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be when I grow up?
Well, it's funny, like when I was talking about Girl on Film, I actually thought I wanted to be a filmmaker. I thought I'd seen Star Wars when I was 7. I thought, this is it. This is what I'm going to be. And every single life choice that I made was to become a filmmaker. Clearly that's not what happened. But that's kind of what that book is about. It's about how you make a decision to do one thing and kind of you end up doing the thing that you're supposed to do. I always loved comics. I like I said, I grew up with them. They were always a part of my literacy and my fluency. But probably when I got to college and I started reading like Love and Rockets and all the Vertigo books, that sort of sparked my interest. But then something cool happened. I lived in Montreal when I had to drop out of NYU. I moved back home to where my parents had moved home to Canada, and I was in Montreal, and I worked at this vegetarian co-op cafe, and this guy was starting this new comic book company, Drawn and Quarterly, and so we would have the cafe. Drawn and Quarterly would throw these bande dessinée en direct comic book jams, and they would have a theme for the night, and everybody would get a Bristol board, and they would just like draw, and we'd drink beer, and and it was amazing. It was incredible, and you can imagine who was there at the time. It was like Chester Brown and Seth and Julie Doucet, and it was just a really amazing experience. So. And I was in a punk band at the time. And so I kind of had this, and there would often be like music playing at these comic jams. So for me, those two worlds were kind of sort of melded. But then one day, this is like a very long answer, but then one day when I was living in Texas with a boyfriend in Austin, and I went to the comic book store, I knew I wanted to write books at this point. This is, and I saw, but I still liked comics, but it had become too expensive for me, after college. And so, but I went and I saw this book, The Dead Enders by Ed Brubaker. And I knew that I wanted to write young adult novels. And I picked up that book and I was like, this is a young adult novel. And I was like, I can do this. And then I Alta Vista'd, how to submit a comic book. And I couldn't figure it out. And everything on the DC website or the Vertigo website seemed to be geared towards artists, understandably. So I just thought, okay, well, I guess I'll just become a novelist and I'll never get to write comics. But I knew comics was always this thing from my, late teens, early 20s to, when the Dead Enders came out. It was just always a thing that I thought that I would love.
That's cool. So how did you bridge from being a novelist, wanting to be a novelist, and being a novelist to realizing that you could do comics?
Yeah, so I'd read The Dead Enders and then tried to apply to become a comic book writer, and that did not work. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll become a novelist. And I wrote a novel called Boy Proof, which is all about a girl who's obsessed with post-apocalyptic science fiction films and Vertigo comics. And
who you?
Yeah. And Shelley, the apple did not fall far from the tree. And Shelley Bond was launching a new line called Minx over at DC Comics. And she was looking for a young adult writer that might be interested in comics. And she'd not had much success, but somebody gave her my name. They were like, oh, Cecil likes comics. And she read, Boy Proof, which, like I said, name checks all these Vertigo books. So she called me and just said, hey, would you ever be interested in writing comics? I'm from Vertigo. And I was like, I literally have been trying to figure out how to contact you for like 6 years, So, so then I told her my Dead Enders story. And I was like, I said this book, The Dead Enders, and blah, blah, blah. And she had edited The Dead Enders.
Nice.
So you know, it was clear. And she was like, do you have any ideas? Maybe you could think about it. I was like, I have 5 ideas right now. And I just like burst forward. And that's how the Plain Janes came about.
Mm-hmm.
But I also knew that, like, you know, I was coming in from novels. At the time, I think I had 2 novels out. And I was writing my 3rd. And I was like, I want people to understand that I'm very serious about
Mm-hmm.
writing comics. Like, this is something that I have always loved and I've always wanted to do. And, you know, as a lady, you know, I felt like I had to do a lot of explaining that, like, you know, this wasn't just like, oh, I just read a Superman the other day. It was like, no, it's in my DNA, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how, I mean, talking about that, because this seems like it's been a long process for you to get to the love. How have you seen the comic industry change since you started this whole process?
Since I started writing or since I started engaging in it?
Kind of all of it, like how hard it was in the beginning and then moving on to you get your first gig and how it's changed over the years for you.
Well, I think, you know, in the beginning, it wasn't very easy for a girl to be a nerdy girl in the 80s. And comic book stores at the time were not quite welcoming.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really did depend on my brother and his pull list so that I had sort of a psychic barrier
Mm-hmm.
between me and that. And it was very difficult to sort of explain that kind of love to your friends. You know, I had my friends that I hung out with. I was actually just Zooming. We had Zoom cocktails, my friends from middle school the other day. And they were like, you're always a nerd, but we were okay with it. But they didn't engage with that stuff, like my D&D playing and my sci-fi loving and my comic book loving. So I had this other group of like friends, these very amazing nerdy girls who did go to comic book conventions. And so, you know, I went with them starting when I was 11. But once again, it was, you know, it was like we were 3, 12, 11-year-old, 12-year-olds. And it was just a very different vibe. There weren't very many of us, you know? So in that sense, I think it's changed a lot. I mean, now you go to conventions and I would say it's like 60-40 ladies and gentlemen, you know,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot, you know, it's just completely different. And you don't have to like sort of, I mean, you have to buffer yourself in a different way being a woman in comics, but you know, I'm sure you know all of what I'm saying.
I've done this for 30 years, so yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. You know, obviously I liked the, you know, the fact that you could sort of pick up comics anywhere and sort of enter into comics in any issue and you kind of knew what was going on. Like you didn't have to sort of be a completist. I mean, it helped, but you could just sort of pick up a single issue of something and kind of there was a easier, not easier, but a different kind of way that I think comics were written at the time. So,
maybe not so much with the idea they're going to get collected.
Yeah, you know, and I actually, I don't know if you know this, but I wrote a comic book opera. I've written 2 comic book operas. And so I wrote the libretto and the art was projected with balloons and word captions to be like, yeah, so that you kind of, I'll send you a link if you're interested.
Ooh, yeah.
And it was great artists. It was Cameron Stewart, Michael Cho, Pascal Girard, and Scott Hepburn who did the art. And it was 4 different genres because that's what I remembered when I was growing up reading comics is that you moved swiftly from like romance comic to military comic to kids comic to, you know, like just kind of going through a stack, through a pile and very easily moving around. I think now we do tend to go towards more, you know, sort of complete stories. But I think we do that with all stories that we engage with. I feel like television is like that as well. It's not so much sort of like, you know, the familiar characters in one episode and you can jump in anywhere. As a storyteller, I love the longer ability to tell story. So that's great.
Neat. I like that. That's good. I often have a hard time explaining to younger kids that like when I was growing up, I could just buy a comic and that was that. It was like an episode If you read the whole series, it was better, but you could just jump in and out. And now it's a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish that we had a little bit more towards an even balance between that, so I could get more kids and teenagers just jumping into it. But I also like picking up a book and just sitting and reading it. So
yeah,
I wish there was a way to balance the two.
I mean, I think that's another thing that's really, really changed as well. I mean, when I started in comics, you know, the Plain Janes was aimed towards young adults, middle grade. There really wasn't an infrastructure for that at the time. You know, I mean, Plain Janes came out 2 years before Smile did. So this was, you know, they wouldn't even put the Minx books in the kids section at the bookstores. Librarians were not, you know, they didn't know how to curate lists yet and curate their collections. There weren't very many books. So I often say that like Minx which was a brilliant line, all the books on that line, and everybody that worked on that line is like superstars now, you know, like Faith Aaron, Faith, did she work on one? No, she was supposed to do the third Jane's book. She was supposed to do like Jim was going to lay it out and she was going to ink it. But Mariko Tamaki and Joelle Jones and Sophie Campbell, you know, I mean, just if you look at the list, Brian Wood, whatever, you know, like there's like a, sorry.
That was awesome. Continue.
People.
Yes.
And, but it's, it was just before its time. There was no support system for that, you know, whatever. And I often say to the people in the Minx line, it's like, you know, well, we put on our bonnets and we tried to go west and we died on the trail, you know, like.
I carried the whole Minx line in my store and I read all of them and I loved all of them. Yeah. So I was an early convert, but I also was, you know, a lady in the industry, and I wanted anything that was young adult and anything lady to be pushed.
So I mean, now I feel like that's really changed too, you know, because like I feel like you know, like Raina, our queen, you know, is sort of like the force that is changing comics, and I think also the force that is moving things much more towards the sort of collected or you know, sort of I don't know what you would say, larger stories, fatter stories, like thicker books, that collections that you know, that are less serialized. And I think we gain something from that, but I also think we lose something from that. There's something nice as a writer to be able to shift mid story, because you see how things kind of are landing or not landing, and there's more sort of flexibility in the storytelling, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. You know, that's very different than when I write a graphic novel and you're writing the whole thing and then it goes all out at once, you know.
Is there any like differences in kind of your process between writing single issues that are going to be collected, graphic novel that all comes out at once, and just a novel? How does your process differ in that?
Yeah, for sure. It differs, you know, with a monthly, it depends which monthly. With Batgirl, I'm not as far ahead as I was, say, with like Female Furies or Shade, because I kind of knew sort of what I wanted to do with that. And I kind of had free reign because I was not in a shared universe, you know. That's different when you're in a shared universe.
Absolutely.
But still there was a kind of flexibility because working with Marley or Adriana, you know, there's this possibility of this sort of back and forth that was going on, and you can sort of improve and change the story. They're not just getting it and that's it. Whereas like when I do a graphic novel, like with Plain Janes, I mean, Jim and I collaborate and we talk all the time and text all the time. I do that with all the artists pretty much that I work with. But the story, because it's much longer, is sort of a little bit more set in stone. The flexibility comes from, I'll say, like with Jim, I do full script where I'll say panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, but Jim and I just know that that's just so that he has an idea of what I think the pacing is, but
Mhm.
sometimes he'll be like, I made this 2 pages instead of 1, or, or I
Mhm.
made these 2 pages 1 splash or whatever. And that's fine, So, but the story is a little bit more set in stone.
Mhm.
Um, whereas the way that we tell the story when we were doing it monthly with Shade and Female Furies, even though I knew it was 6 issues and I kind of had an idea of what that arc was going to look like, there was possibility for discovery mid, sort of mid issue and mid that you could you could change a little bit more easily.
And do you find that the artists have a lot of input on the story, or are you much more like, here's the story, draw it, or like where is your level of collaboration, for instance, in DC versus your own books? Because I would imagine in your own books that, like Plain Jane's, that you're like, this is it, and you have this person that you're collaborating with, but on another story that's not quite yours, you might, just if you could just talk about kind of the differences in working on your own projects versus other projects, and where you're precious about what happens on the page, I guess is.
I think for me, the way that I kind of describe it is that if I want to be the goddess of a story and I want to be the person that says, this is it, this is the story, and that's it, I write a novel, because that is where I am the queen and I can do whatever I want, and it's my story and nobody can mess with it and whatever. But the joy of comics is the collaboration. That's the best part of it. So when I'm doing a comic book, I absolutely, like I said, Jim and I, would have long conversations about the girls and like what they were doing and how they were feeling, and that definitely influences me. It was interesting going back to writing those characters after 12 years, because I don't write like that anymore and Jim doesn't draw like that anymore. We've grown, and so we had lots of conversations and collaborations about the art attacks that they do. Whereas like in the first book, I sort of conceived most of them, because Jim was not, I feel like he knew about, art attacks and like, sort of conceptual art like that, because he's a smart, brilliant man, but I think he hadn't really, like, I was really excited about people like Banksy, and like, I'd grown up like walking on Keith Haring's chalk drawings in the subways and stuff. And so I was like, oh my God, like this is what we're going to do. And so I feel like with this third book, like him and I really had long discussions about the meaning of the art attacks that they did, and like what it, we really crafted them together, and the story. I mean, I think there's sort of this unspoken thing where it's like the writer gets final say in the narrative and the artist gets final say in the art. And that kind of works, but I welcome that input, because I think that you make, if you become too precious about the story and you don't, then you might let slip away the telling of it in the best way possible. Sorry, with DC, there was a lot more freedom with Female Furies because I wasn't necessarily in continuity. I was kind of in my own bubble, Female Fury, Dark Side, New Gods world. The same thing with Shade the Changing Girl, wasn't really in continuity. So I kind of had more freedom to do what I, sort of do what I wanted. And I mean, Marley and I collaborated like crazy. I mean, we were texting all the time, and me and Adriana as well, because those books were so important to us. With Batgirl, it's different because it's a shared universe. So it's like I have to pay attention. I might have an intention to go one way, but then, Batman does something, or Superman does something, or somebody does something, and then I gotta course correct. So there's a lot of constant adjusting.
Well, and the Bat family's pretty big too, so there's a lot going on in that.
Somebody, like, I thought there was like a solicitation that happened for one of the Batgirl books recently. She was supposed to go to Chicago. That's in the solicitation. It said she was going to Chicago and this and that. And then, you know, and then that's not what the actual book was, you know, and someone was mean on Twitter to me about it. And I was just like,
You
guess
tell me who
what?
they are.
I was like, guess what? That's the nature of comics. Like, especially when you're sharing a universe, you can't predict that suddenly there's going to be an event or that suddenly something happens that another book is like, oh, we need to go this way. And if we're going to go this way, then we gotta bring the whole Bat family with us, you know? So
You don't get to be in Chicago. What was kind of the impetus of bringing Plain Janes back after so long?
well, first of all, I mean, it was number one after Mink's line went demised, and you know, Karen Berger, when she was still at Vertigo, really fought to get book one reissued on Vertigo, so that because book one had gone out of print, but book two was still available, but Minx was no longer there, so it did come out on Vertigo. Book one, and it was relevant, and it was, you know,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so and then we really feel like, I think we all felt like, you know, everybody at DC felt like there had been no infrastructure for these kinds of books. But then as you know, as books, you know, like Smile came out, or, you know, this one summer, like First Second started doing bigger, like all graphics, like all these things, it was like, we should just reissue this. And so it took me 5 years to beg DC for the rights back. Me and Jim, we just, like, every year we'd meet at a Comic-Con, we'd be like, all right, I'm writing another letter. And
this time it'll work.
Yeah, and then finally it worked, because I think they still weren't on board. Funny now, but they still weren't on board with the young adult kids thing. And of course now they do. They have this huge, you know, young adult and kids line. So I don't know whether or not it's like, oh, bummer, like, you know, they should have done that 2 years earlier. I should have waited you know what I mean? Like, or if it's exactly the way that it was supposed to be, you know, which I think it is. You know, I mean, I would have loved to have had it on DC. I tried very, very hard to get them to do it anyway, you know, any way they could, to put it on Vertigo, to put it on Young Animal, to, you know, every single iteration of, like, trying to get it out on DC. But so yeah, so we just thought it was time for, you know, a book like that. And you know, I mean, I came up with all those young adult people like Jean and Raina and Hope Larson and Faith and, you know, Mariko, like that's my crew, you know? And so, and I think that, like, the Plain Janes was kind of the tip of the arrow, you know? And so we wanted it to come out, and I feel like, sadly, it's more relevant now than it was when it came out. I mean, in a good way, but also in a kind of like, oh, I'm sad that society is still messed up.
That this is still needed.
Yeah.
So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to kind of end it with, what would you say to those young ladies and young men, the young people out there that want to do this? What, after having taken so long to get there and to get your stuff out there in such a great way and to bring Plain Janes back, what would you tell people out there that want to follow this path?
Well, first of all, I would say, I'm sure everyone else will say this, read a lot, you know, go to museums, go see a lot of movies, watch a lot of television, play a lot of video games, because all of that fun stuff is actually you nourishing your creative bank, you know, and figuring out what your voice is and what your style is. And then the second thing I would say is make stuff, you know, make stuff and put it out there, because the work begets work. So the more stuff that you put out there that you can point people to, the better you get, because people, you know, will critique you. And, you know, and also you've accomplished the major thing that any artist needs, which is finishing something, like actually finishing it. That's the only thing that's important in art. So I
love it.
Yeah. So I would say that. have a lot of fun watching all the things that you want to watch and reading all the things that you want to read, you know, because it's all research, and then make the stuff.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, on that note, I just wanted to say thank you again for being a part of our Free Comic Day. And thank you for helping us with our technical difficulties. And if there's anything else you want to post on Free Comic Day, please feel free. I've never done it this way before, so we'll figure it out.
I had sent you some of these, right? I'd sent you some of these.
Yes.
Do you want, I could send, well, let me see, I don't know where, I'm going to stop the recording.
Oh, okay. Bye, thank you.
Bye.